Blanka Dżugaj, witam wszystkich serdecznie. Dzisiaj Azja Incognita, wydanie specjalne i rozmowa z dr Bahar Jalali, Afganką mieszkającą obecnie w Stanach Zjednoczonych, wykładowczynią historii Afganistanu na Loyola University i autorką słynnej na całym świecie kampanii online Do Not Touch My Clothes. Dr. Jalali, last summer you heard the news about US troops withdrawal from Afghanistan. Your first thought was?
I was, of course, devastated, but I knew President Biden's attitude towards Afghanistan, so it did not surprise me. However, I was very, very devastated.
You felt what would happen? Haven't believed in this friendly image of Taliban shown in social media?
Yeah, it's absolutely. I have literally become physically sick when I see how normalized the Taliban have become in the international community, and it's really insulting to all the victims who have been killed and murdered by the Taliban for 3 decades and their families. It's very difficult as an Afghan to just sit by on the sidelines and watch helplessly while the Taliban are becoming legitimized by powerful countries.
You said about Biden's attitude to Afghanistan. What do you mean?
So when President Biden has a very negative attitude towards Afghanistan, when he was vice president under Barack Obama, he disagreed with President Obama's decision to increase troops in Afghanistan. He thinks that Afghanistan is a failed state, that Afghans are incapable of governing themselves, and that Afghanistan has never been a viable state. He's clearly not, he has no knowledge of Afghan history, Afghanistan, and unfortunately, he refuses to listen to all of his advisors. When he decided to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, he went against the advice of his own national security advisor. So his personal bias against Afghanistan is so strong that he doesn't even want to listen to his own cabinet officials who advised him that if you withdraw troops from Afghanistan, the Taliban are going to take over and everything's going to, and the government is going to fall apart. That's exactly what happened. He didn't care. He withdrew, and this is where we are right now.
You are an Afghan woman, you are a feminist, but you are living in the United States of America now. It can be a little bit easier. I am not going to say easy because it's not easy for none of us to be a feminist, but a little bit easier. I wonder if it's possible to be an Afghan feminist living in Afghanistan now.
You mean now, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, I think you've seen, if you've been following the news on Afghanistan, brave Afghan women have been protesting after the Taliban takeover of power. They have been demonstrating and protesting on the streets. Some of these women have been kidnapped. They have been harassed. Their families have been harassed. So whether it's easy or difficult to be a feminist in Afghanistan right now, is we are seeing brave women. I don't know if these women would call themselves feminists, but they are definitely protesting because they are protesting for women's rights. They're protesting, they're women, they're demonstrating, they're demanding their rights. So I don't know if they want to be labeled feminist or they we should label them as such, but the fact that they're advocating for their rights does mean that Afghan women are very conscious of they stand to lose a lot under a Taliban regime. And we also have to remember that Afghanistan today is a very different country than it was when the Taliban were last in power in the 1990s. The people living in Kabul and cities, they have a very different culture than the people living in rural areas in the countryside. So it's going to be harder for the Taliban to implement that extremist ideology of just erasing women from public life, depriving them of education, of the opportunity to work, and to have a public role. So yes, it's difficult, but women in Afghanistan are very brave, and they're fighting because they stand to lose everything.
Yes, indeed. I was about to ask you about this protesting women because they are still protesting. Uh, Obviously, they are not going to give up their rights without fight. Do you think they have a chance for success? And what would we consider as a success in this case?
I think that their problem, that their challenges, is being made worse when you see the Taliban attending meetings in Geneva, when you
Mhm.
see a British member of parliament say, "Hey, it's time to recognize the Taliban." So the women of Afghanistan feel forgotten, feel abandoned, because what you see these days is very powerful people in very powerful countries normalizing the Taliban, making them seem like that they're good guys, that, hey,
Mhm.
and Afghans are asking, why did you fight them for 20 years if now you want to recognize them as the government? So in terms of success, I think it will be very difficult for the women of Afghanistan to succeed when you have all these powerful countries kind of promoting recognition of the Taliban as a government. But inside Afghanistan, even if the Taliban are recognized as the official government, it's not going to be easy for them to govern when the country now, there's a lot of young people in the country. They are educated, more educated than ever before. They are aware of their rights. So even if the international community recognizes them, it's not going to be easy for them to govern over Afghanistan.
You are part of this resistance because you started an online campaign focused on preservation both women rights in Afghanistan and the cultural heritage of Afghanistan. I mean, of course, Do Not Touch My Clothes campaign, which was a huge success, international success. Can you tell me about the motivation to start this campaign?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, I was a small child when I left Afghanistan. I was about 6 years old, but I did finish first grade in Afghanistan. I was raised in the United States, and then I did go back in 2009 to teach at the American University of Afghanistan. And from my early childhood memory, and the time that I went back to Afghanistan as an adult, I noticed that many aspects of our culture were lost, had died, and that made me very, very sad. And so this was something that I had been thinking about for many years. And I knew that Pakistan's interference in Afghanistan was a big part of that. So when the Taliban took power on August 15th, and then in September, they had this event at Kabul University with all these women dressed completely covered, even their faces covered,
Mhm.
something I had never seen in Afghanistan before. That's when my worst fears were confirmed. I said, we have to fight for the survival of our cultural heritage. And I said, well, there's nothing else I can do. I uploaded a photo of myself in a traditional Afghan dress to kind of, and I told other Afghan women to do the same. I said, look, our identity is being erased. Our identity is under attack. Regardless of what kind of country we are, every country has a right to preserve its heritage. And I had no idea that it would get so big. But after I uploaded my photo, the next morning it was all over. I was being contacted by journalists from all over the world, and I'm very, very happy that that campaign garnered so much international media coverage, because I don't want the world to think that extremism, religious extremism, deprivation of women's rights is what Afghanistan is. Because in the 1960s, we had a very progressive government. Women entered parliament. Women were in the cabinet of the government. Women were doctors. And so the reason why Afghanistan is where it is today is because of the interference of so many different countries. And
Mhm.
so it's something I'm continuing to work on. This campaign, this resistance is not going to end with Do Not Touch My Clothes campaign. I'm trying to find ways and trying to find grants and fellowships to make this project bigger, because today with the Taliban in power, I'm really concerned that future generations, are they going to even remember the real Afghanistan?
And about this amazing clothes, because I was amazed by the beauty of these costumes and the response, the international response of your campaign. Do not touch my clothes. This hashtag is wow, it's still active. I wrote an article about this, about you and your campaign in Polish media also, but. Can we see this amazing clothes in some part of Afghanistan nowadays?
Unfortunately, we are seeing it less and less. But yes, in the rural areas, for example, amongst the Afghan nomads are called kuchis, and for them, this type of clothing is their everyday clothing. It's not something that they wear on a special occasion. For the Afghan nomads, I'm actually wearing a nomadic dress. That's what they wear every day. So if you travel to that part of Afghanistan. In the central part and the west, southern eastern part, you're going to see that everywhere, because that's the only clothing that they wear. But unfortunately, with the Taliban now in power, I think that women might be too scared to wear it. They're going to try to wear the all black, and it's unfortunately very, very, very sad, because those dresses are really a part of the identity of Afghanistan. So it has to, wearing that dress is a celebration of Afghan culture.
We are talking about clothes. It seems to be a little bit irrelevant regarding the ban of education, independent life, professional career. But in your opinion, the priority is to improve the access to education for women, improve the economic situation, the political representation, or maybe something more symbolic like burqa.
So of course, the most immediate concern for women in Afghanistan is the restoration of their fundamental human rights, which is the access to education, access to employment, the ability to leave their homes and not be harassed in public. The ability to live in their homes without fear of being kidnapped, without fear of Taliban soldiers knocking on their doors and detaining them, without their families knowing where they are. That's very, very important. But the thing is, the Taliban also want to. One of the ways the Taliban, like to, I don't know how to. I'm at a loss for words. One of the ways that they want to demonstrate that they're the rulers of Afghanistan is through various symbols, and clothing has been a very big part of that. The burqa, right? Now, the burqa has traditionally been worn in Afghanistan. Historically, it's not from Afghanistan. When Afghanistan was at peace, the only time you ever saw the burqa was in rural areas. I remember Kabul when I was 5 or 6 years old. Kabul was the capital of Afghanistan, was a very, very cosmopolitan city. My mother wore miniskirts. She wore a miniskirt. Yeah, it's on my Twitter account. My mother wore a miniskirt on her wedding day. So for the Taliban to now come in and say the burqa is traditional Afghan attire is very, very misleading. Because it was something that it was there, but for urban women, it's not something that they wore. So I feel like clothing, my campaign wasn't we used clothing as a means to raise awareness about Taliban restrictions. But it's the clothing campaign, "Do Not Touch My Clothes," was ultimately about preserving and safeguarding. It's about the survival of Afghan cultural heritage, because Afghanistan has always been a conservative country, has always been a Muslim country. It was never this very, very modern country, although it was modernizing. But the Afghan traditional clothing, no matter what part of Afghanistan you're in, was just a very fundamental part of our identity. And to try to erase that is kind of like cultural genocide.
Regarding of the role played by social media, for example, during the Arab Spring, and the success of your online campaign, the success of many online campaigns in India, launched by Indian girls at Twitter, of course. Do you think social media and this kind of new technologies is a weapon against the Taliban regime, maybe all regime in general?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Mhm.
Because first of all, let's take a look at the last time the Taliban were in power in the 1990s. The only time we were really informed about what they were doing was through, major media networks. Um, but social media has really enabled Afghans from all over the world to raise awareness about, the situation in Afghanistan, the situation of Afghan women and girls, and my campaign would not have been possible without social media. The ability to reach the world, the globe, in a very instantly, is extremely important. And I do think that our campaign, although it was an online campaign outside of Afghanistan, I think that it did a really, really excellent job of informing people all over the world that the Taliban culture is not Afghan culture. So I do think social media has been extremely valuable and instrumental in connecting, and allowing people to tell their stories, sharing knowledge, and reaching a very large audience.
Are you going to launch another campaign,
I hope
online
so.
campaign?
I hope so. In recent months, Afghanistan is currently facing starvation, famine.
Mhm.
So that's really, really kind of tempered my priorities. Every week, I get at least 3 phone calls from friends and associates in Afghanistan saying, please send me money. Otherwise, my children are going to starve. People are selling their children in Afghanistan right now to be able to survive. That's how desperate people are. So my next campaign would probably be focusing on on children. A lot of them are being sold by their families, and that's I'm a single mother. I have a young daughter, and it just makes me sick when I read these stories.
I'm not a mother, but I understand you and these feelings. But the Taliban's control in Afghanistan led international organizations to hold the non-humanitarian help, the billion of dollars. Is this a good solution? You said acute hunger, the humanitarian crisis. Can we help? Should Western countries help? Or it's an inner affair of Afghanistan and we should stay away?
Absolutely, the international community is obligated to help,
Mhm.
because so many. I mean, Afghanistan's current crisis is very much a problem that was, to a very large extent, created by the international communities in the United States, other countries. So there are ways to deliver humanitarian aid by bypassing the Taliban. So I think that aid is very, very crucial, to help Afghans survive. And I think it can be delivered. And I think the international community has a moral obligation to do that.
In Myanmar, humanitarian organizations try to avoid junta regime and give the help to ordinary people. This is a solution in Afghanistan also, avoid Taliban regime.
I think it can be done. Yes, you
Mhm.
probably are aware that recently Joe Biden made a decision to basically award half of Afghanistan's foreign reserves, which is $7 billion, half of that money to victims of the 9/11 attacks in the United States.
Mhm.
So many Afghans are very upset about that because that was Afghanistan's money. And then the other half would go to humanitarian aid. I do think the international community can do that, can bypass the Taliban to do that. But the problem that I see right now is that it seems to me that a lot of people in Western governments are legitimizing the Taliban. And that's a cause for concern, because if the aid is delivered to Afghanistan, and there's no mechanism to ensure delivery to the Afghan people, then it's highly likely that the Taliban might just take the money for themselves, not deliver it. That needs to be done. But Biden's recent decision does not give me a lot of hope.
You're a pessimist, or it's something more?
I wouldn't say I'm a pessimist. I just really don't like the current trends. Last week, a British member of parliament said, it's time to recognize the Taliban. Even people who were once very critical of the Taliban are now saying, well, it's time to engage with them. I don't like this idea that there's no alternative to the Taliban. There are other alternatives. And I feel like, unlike the past, when the Taliban were in power in the 1990s, they were completely isolated. Now it seems to me that it's the West more than anybody else that's really legitimizing them. And of course, Pakistan, they're a proxy force of Pakistan, and Pakistan has had this long-held goal of installing a client regime in Afghanistan, erasing Afghan culture. And Pakistan is an ally of a major non-NATO ally of the U.S., even though they are responsible for supporting the Taliban, which killed NATO troops. So I wouldn't say I'm a pessimist, but I'm just when I look at the current developments, it does not make me hopeful unless they change.
Don't you think Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan is stuck in the middle between the Western expectation and the Taliban in his garden?
No, Imran Khan is a staunch supporter of the Taliban. He does not respect Afghan sovereignty. And he, of course, as you know, in Pakistan, it's the military that's really the power holders. And one of the reasons Imran Khan became prime minister is because he supports the military's policies in Afghanistan, very predatory, aggressive policies in Afghanistan. So Imran Khan is really an enemy of Afghanistan, and he supports the Taliban wholeheartedly. He even said something like, women or girls not going to school is part of Afghan culture. He said something ridiculous like that.
Yes, he said, not educating girls is a part of Afghan culture, and moreover, every society's idea of human rights and women's rights are different.
He's just justifying the Taliban. He's just making, it's his way of supporting the Taliban. In the 1920s, we had a king who was a feminist king, King Amanullah. Women's rights in Afghanistan goes back to the 19th century under King Amir Abdurrahman Khan. So women's rights, girls' education, there's a history in Afghanistan of all of these things. And Imran Khan should not speak for Afghanistan because he's not an Afghan. So many Afghans were very, very upset at that. And, when he says stuff like that, it's just further evidence of Pakistan's support for the Taliban and Pakistan's invasion. What happened in August 15th, the Americans withdrew and Pakistan invaded because the Taliban are a Pakistani proxy force. Most of the Taliban were not born in Afghanistan. They did not grow up in Afghanistan. They were born and bred in Pakistan. So for me, I don't consider the Taliban an Afghan movement, and most Afghans don't.
Yes, exactly. Okay, we will go back to the education, but now you always highlight in your tweets that the Taliban are not part of Afghanistan tradition, Afghan culture. They are foreign element.
Yes, absolutely. Almost all major Afghan scholars have written on this, right? The Taliban began as a refugee movement. So basically, a lot of Afghanistan has been at war for over 40 years. So you've had different waves of refugees. Many of those refugees went to Pakistan, and over time, you have different generations. The Afghan war lasted so long that you had so many waves of refugees. So a lot of those poorer refugees, vulnerable refugees, became recruited by Pakistan's military intelligence service, ISI. They were a lot of them were born in Pakistan. They were recruited, trained, and groomed by Pakistan military intelligence to become jihadis, they were indoctrinated into this extremist ideology. And so for these people they became the Taliban, Afghanistan was like a distant, faraway homeland that they never experienced. And the Pakistani military establishment basically brainwashed them into saying, go reclaim your homeland. But they, at the same time, reclaim your homeland and turn it into this, radical, extremist, terrorist safe haven. So it's important to understand that the Taliban was born from Afghan refugees in Pakistan, and these are people who really don't have any experience of living in Afghanistan and living in authentic Afghan culture.
You wrote once on Twitter, the only Afghans who support Taliban are a small group of spineless opportunists who only want to protect their financial interest. I can imagine that, maybe I'm wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I can imagine that the people from small villages hidden in the mountains, far away from the big cities, support Taliban, who help them a lot. Let's face it, Afghanistan during the recent 20 years wasn't a wealthy country. The corruption is unbelievable. The government is a result of unstable conditions, and the economic is far away from good. So maybe some Afghans consider Taliban regime as a greater stability.
I don't think it's because they subscribe to the Taliban ideology or they believe that the Taliban provides stable government, because the former government failed to provide those services that a government typically does. For example, what do Afghans expect from a government? To control the territory, protect the population, and deliver services. The former Afghan government under President Karzai and under President Ghani could not do that. And so people in the villages and the rural areas, it's not because they love the Taliban, it's because the Taliban were the only alternative to the lack of a government. And so if you're living in rural Afghanistan and you just want to survive, and that's all you want to survive, you want your family to survive, that's your only goal in life, of course you're going to support whatever group that's going to ensure that, even if it means the Taliban. So we really have to look at this issue in terms of rural support for the Taliban in the larger context of Afghanistan's Afghan society, and the failure of the Afghan governments to really, be competent to really govern in many ways. I mean, the government under Ashraf Ghani, government was reduced to a tiny, small group of young, inexperienced people who had no idea. His national security advisor, Hamdullah Moheb, was one of my former colleagues at the American University. He has an IT background, and now he's national security advisor, somebody in his 30s. Because President Ghani wanted only loyalists. He didn't want competent, experienced people in the government. So it's really a failure on the part of the Afghan governments as well. If the Afghan governments were competent, the Taliban would not have succeeded.
I think so. But speaking about support to Taliban, many pro-Taliban women staged their own demonstration. I guess it's September in Kabul, but I could be wrong. It is believed that this demonstration was arranged by Taliban. What do you think? Can Afghan women can support Taliban and their vision of the place of women in religion and social life?
To be honest with you, that September event where the pro-Taliban women,
Yeah.
I feel like that was clearly a staged and contrived event. That was staged by the Taliban. That was not some natural, spontaneous, organic gathering of Afghan women who supported the Taliban. Number two, I have no idea who those women were. Number one, they were all covered. There's also been speculation that some of them were brought in from Pakistan. So it's at this point it's really hard to know who they were. Some of them have even been men because they were all covered. So that was completely staged. And the fact that you see all these demonstrations during this very difficult time where women really are risking their lives by demonstrating, it will be, at least in the urban areas, I could say that it will be very difficult, if not impossible, for the Taliban to govern unless, of course, they do it by force and violence. I do not see, absolutely not, do I see a natural, organic, female support in Afghanistan for the Taliban. Absolutely not, unless, of course, it's forced. Now, when I wrote my tweet, the only Afghans who support, you do have some educated, Western educated Afghans who went to Afghanistan in the past 20 years. They became very wealthy because of the war. They want to protect their assets. They want to protect all those networks they have. They want to be able to continue to travel to Afghanistan. And because of that, and only because of that, not because of ideology, because the lifestyle of some of these women is it's a very Western lifestyle. It's a very liberal lifestyle. The Taliban would never approve of it. They want to just basically maintain their assets, and because of that, they're willing to tolerate the Taliban. Some of these women have even been actively promoting the Taliban. But if you look at, these are very privileged women who refuse to live under the Taliban regime, who are wealthy. But it's really disgusting to watch them because they are very privileged themselves. They have Western passports. They don't have to live under a Taliban regime, but they want the Taliban for the poor, innocent Afghan women who don't have that wealth, who don't have a way to leave Afghanistan, who don't have Western passports. So those are the people that I was referring to in my tweet.
Okay, I understand. The Taliban banned women and girls from secondary and higher education. United Nations experts wrote that Taliban attempting to exclude women and girls from public life. And moreover, Human Rights Watch new report says Taliban rule has had a devastating impact on Afghan women and girls who have become virtual prisoners in their home. At the beginning of February, the Taliban has said they want to allow girls to continue attending schools. Experts are skeptical, so do I. And what about you?
Absolutely. The Taliban desperately want international recognition. So this is part of their effort to try to convince the West that, hey, we will eventually allow Afghan girls to go to school when the time is right, right? So it's really just a disingenuous a way of trying to convince the international community to recognize them, because I've read some of the reports about girls' schools. And what I've learned is that the girls right now are afraid to leave their homes. So under a Taliban regime, even if the Taliban would allow girls to go up secondary school age females to go to school, a lot of families would not even allow their daughters to go to those schools because they don't feel that the environment, their girls would be safe outside of the home. So, of course, we have to be extremely skeptical of that. The Taliban cannot be trusted. Their words are pointless. And so, they're morally bankrupt. And I'm really surprised that they're being taken so seriously and normalized, given their record of violence and given their record against the women and girls.
Is support to the Taliban linked in any way to ethnicity? Of course, in Afghanistan.
To some extent, yes. To some extent, I would say so, but not a lot, because a lot of Pashtuns. I'm an ethnic Pashtun, and I'm the most anti-Taliban person there is on the planet, and I would like to have that honor. But I would say that unfortunately there are some Pashtuns who support that group for no other reason but ethnicity. But I would say that they're not a large group of people.
You are Pashtun?
Yes, by ethnicity, but Pashtuns, of course, are a very diverse ethnic group. Rural Pashtuns tend to be quite different from urban Pashtuns, and I come from a more urban secular background. So, in my family, there's a lot of intermarriage between different ethnic groups. So.
No. I'm asking because my friend said, no, Dr. Jalali, 90% she's not Pashtun.
I'm 100% Pashtun, and my mother is a teacher of Pashto language and literature. Unfortunately, Pashtuns have been ridiculed for 20 years by the Western media. And one of the reasons I'm writing my book is because under the Pashtun monarchy, Afghanistan was becoming a secularized country, at least the urban areas were. So unfortunately, this is something I've seen a lot. And so what your friend told you does not surprise me.
Okay. So is there any connection between Taliban ideology and the Pashtunwali?
No, absolutely not. I actually wrote a tweet about this. Pashtunwali, one of the most major aspects of Pashtunwali is protecting women's honor. We have seen how the Taliban have executed women in soccer stadiums in the 1990s. How they have been very violent towards women. So one of the ways that I like to, advocate against the Taliban is I actually use Pashtunwali to say that the Taliban call themselves a Pashtun movement, but they're violating the Pashtun code of honor, which is Pashtunwali, right? Yeah. So like if you go to a rural Pashtun area of Afghanistan and you're a woman, I remember I once traveled to a rural part of Afghanistan, and I remember being in a home, a Pashtun man came into my room and he felt so bad. He felt so guilty. He apologized and closed my door. So no, that's an interesting question that you pose, because I've actually used Pashtunwali as a way to go against the Taliban. So there's not only is there no connection, Pashtunwali, if you read the code of honor and how women's honor is so important, it just proves that the Taliban are not a Pashtun movement. They're not an Islamic movement. The only thing they are is a terrorist proxy force of Pakistan. That's all. There's no ideology.
How you understand women's honor?
So according to Pashtunwali, or
according to you?
Well, a Pashtun's a woman's honor is that you will accord them equal treatment with men, right? which is what, if you read in the ethical version of Islam, ethically, Islam grants men and women equality. So number one is equality, right? I saw my
Yes.
own mother growing up, a very modern, secular woman, very fashionable woman. I saw my father and how he treated her with so much respect. My father was born in the 1940s, and Afghan men of his generation were very chivalrous. They were gentlemen. They supported honor, and that was the real Afghanistan. That's the genuine Afghanistan. So I'm 47 years old, so I remember a little bit of the old Afghanistan. And I tell people all the time, if you're under 45 years old, please don't give me a lecture on what Afghanistan is. But I saw a little bit of it. So honor is about equality. It's about respecting women's right to choose education, employment, wearing whatever they want to. Afghanistan was not always a super conservative country, because my mother got married in a miniskirt. Her legs were bare, sleeveless, and nobody cared. So honor is about really respecting women's right to decide for themselves how they want to dress, where they want to go to school, what kind of job they want to get, and who they want to marry. And according to their own views. And that's the kind of society Afghanistan was becoming slowly, but steadily in the 1960s, early 70s, before the war happened.
For the first time you fled Afghanistan as a little girl. I was
Yes.
about to ask you, what Afghanistan is in your memory? What kind of country it was?
Well, I was born in Kabul, the capital city. And I remember going to first grade at my school. We had very fashionable uniforms. I remember my mother taking me to shopping in the downtown area. I remember Kabul as a very urban place. And of course, I can't speak for the entire country, because my background is a little bit more privileged. And so some people tell me, you don't represent authentic Afghanistan. You are part of a very small group of people. And that's true. But that small part of Afghanistan was also one part of Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a much more pluralist society. You had all kinds of people, all kinds of ways of life. So I remember Afghanistan, but I remember it was a poor country, always a poor country, but a country where, you had different types of people, different ways of life, and they coexisted with each other. And of course, I don't recognize Afghanistan today from my childhood. It's like a different planet. And of course, 43 years of war would change any country. But as far as Afghanistan is concerned, it's not that the country has been destroyed physically, and people have suffered and so many people have died. There's something deeper, and that's that I feel like the Afghan identity is dying. I feel like my identity, the one that I remember as a child, is being erased. So that's what concerns me the most, because I remember the Afghanistan of my childhood, going to school. And also when I went to first grade, our classes were mixed. Boys and girls were studying together. And nowadays, when I went back to Afghanistan in 2009, you didn't find, even in elementary school, they were separating the boys and girls. That was not the case when I was in first grade. In 1981, we were studying along with the boys. It was normal. Our teachers and our school directors were educated women, and they were to me as a child, they seemed very independent. So imagine seeing your country become transformed like that. Yes, Afghanistan was a poor country. It was a developing country. There was a lot of corruption. Women, there were not a lot of women in government. A lot of women were, did not have were not very liberated. But you had this critical mass of women. And I think that if the war had not happened, that trend would have continued throughout the country.
Of course, but you started gender studies in Afghanistan. Was it your idea? Was it difficult to do this?
Yeah, so what I saw was that when I started teaching in American University of Afghanistan in 2009, I saw that a lot of the female students at the university were experiencing harassment, and because of that, a lot of them were leaving their studies, or if they got engaged to be married, their families would pressure them to leave the university. And then another reason I started that program is because a lot of my students were working on gender mainstreaming programs with international organizations. But when I spoke to them in class, it was obvious that they didn't know concepts like feminism, gender, what is gender equality. So I spoke to the university administration about starting a program in gender studies, and they were very supportive of that. So the administration, and now the administration was Americans, it was not Afghans. So I did start the program, and I began offering classes in gender studies, and half of the students were men. And even the Afghan men really welcomed gender studies program, because one big problem in Afghanistan is forced marriages. And even the men are pushed by their families into forced marriages. Like the parents will say to a young man, why don't you marry your cousin? Or why don't you marry this girl or that girl? They don't want to. So even the boys are often limited in who they can marry. And so the boys really appreciated having a safe space in these gender courses to debate those things. They said, well, we can't debate these things anywhere else in Afghanistan because it's taboo. It's, it's dangerous. So I feel that gender studies program was really, really very much needed because a lot of the students used those classes as an opportunity to discuss some of the social problems young men and women were facing, like forced marriage, and gender in Islam, how Islam, gives women a lot of rights, but you don't see that being implemented in Muslim countries. Divorce, right? Islam recognizes
Yes,
divorce, but divorce is stigmatized in Afghanistan. Or virginity testing. They have virginity tests in Afghanistan, which is just awful.
yeah.
It was actually, I got a lot of support for it. I did start it, and it was in 2015. And I would say that it was quite successful, at least at the university.
Yes. What about now? What about gender studies now?
I really have no idea. I do know that the American University of Afghanistan is still operating, but they're teaching online, because I'm in contact with one of my former colleagues. So I don't know what's going to be the future. I don't know if they're offering gender studies courses. And right now, the situation does not look very positive for gender studies. When you have a regime in power that does not allowing girls to go to school, obviously that's not going to be a favorable context for gender studies.
Of course. You are talking a lot about Pakistan, but I wonder, what is the Afghans' attitude to the another big players in the region? I mean, United States of America, Russia, China, India, of course.
Obviously, all of these actors, have been interfering in Afghanistan in all kinds of ways. Obviously, Pakistan and China are very close allies. And China has been very much supporting the Taliban, promoting the Taliban, and because of the close alliance between those two countries. Russia as well. Russia was initially very, very ambivalent about the Taliban, but more recently they have made statements in support of the Taliban. And India has traditionally been Afghanistan's close ally.
Yes.
But I think that in the early days when the Taliban took power, I think India now has a very nationalist government. So I think their main interest right now is to kind of protect themselves from Taliban, from Pakistan, a country that they have a lot of negative history with. So I really don't, and I've said this before, I really don't see any positive role for any of the countries in the region regarding Afghanistan. The only country in the region that has come out and spoken against the Taliban is Tajikistan. That's it. So as far as these major powers are concerned, none of, obviously Pakistan supports the Taliban. And of course their ally China does too. So it feels like Afghanistan is encircled by these, predatory neighbors. And, it's very, very unfortunate. And that situation is made worse when the United States and and the West is also normalizing the Taliban. So I feel like, Afghanistan is like an orphan right now, without a real proper government and without any real allies.
Narendra Modi from India has a lot of domestic problems after the pandemic, of course, but not only. China is afraid of Islam terrorism. Russia is an ally of China. It doesn't seem good. Okay, so can we make some prognosis for the future, or it's too hard now?
I think as far as Afghanistan is concerned, I don't think it'll be that easy for the Taliban to stay in power that easily like they did in the 1990s, because, okay, they might get support from regional countries. They might be normalized by the international community, the West. But we have to remember that the urban areas of Afghanistan have been transformed significantly in the past 20 years. And I think that if there's going to be an uprising against the Taliban, a major resistance in the country, it's going to be in the urban areas. And I think that if the Taliban move forward and they think that they can rule through violence, it's going to backfire. I don't see them staying in power for very, very long if they continue to promote the same violent policies that they did in the past, because I don't see that. Right now it looks very, very bad, but I don't think it may not stay this way, because Afghanistan is a transformed country. And number two, the Taliban are not technocrats. They really don't know much about governance. They just don't have technical skills. And we've seen that even if an Afghan government is supported from abroad, like the past 20 years, right? If it doesn't have competence, if it can't govern efficiently, then it's not going to survive. So I really think that unless the Taliban change dramatically, unless they become more inclusive, unless they respect women's rights, minority rights, human rights, I don't see this being a long-term, long-term government.
Thank you, Dr. Jalali, for this conversation. Let's hope we are going to see a lot of Afghan girls in this amazing, amazing clothes at the universities, at schools, at streets, and during the professional career.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
Yes, it was a pleasure for me also. Thank you so much.
Thank you.